Okay. Hello and welcome to a very new format of Chilling with Charlie. As we know, one of the cool things about sports analytics is not just the analytics, but people want to visualize what's going on, see the graph, see the code. So today, for the very first episode of the new format, I have the SFU team. So to begin with, Ryker.
Hi, thanks for having us. So my name is Ryker Moreau. I'm a master's statistics student at Simon Fraser University. I've been obsessed with sports my whole life, played hockey growing up, and fell in love with football over the past few years. Within the sports analytics realm, I've gotten a chance to work with the Vancouver Canucks of the NHL in an internship role, and I'm currently interning with a hockey analytics group called Staffleets. And hope to pursue a career in sports analytics once this is all over.
Yeah, very, very cool. Next up, we have Robyn.
Hi, my name is Robyn Ritchie. I'm an SFU student, a PhD student. I did my master's at the University of Manitoba, and I focused on some soccer analytics and mapping when teams are most likely to score in a game. And I did all that with the English Premier League data. I have a passion for statistics and using it in sports that are underrepresented in kind of the stats community. So I'm kind of focusing now on curling analytics and hoping that I can kind of break through in that area. But I also like football, and I've watched it for a long time, and I'm excited that we got to do a project like this.
Yeah, very, very cool. Next up, we have Brendan.
Hi, I'm Brendan Kumagai. Just like Ryker, I'm a master's student here at SFU in my first year under the supervision of Dr. Kim Schwartz, and I'm also interning at Staffleets, which is a hockey analytics company here in Canada. And I've always loved hockey my whole life growing up. I was pretty much consumed with it throughout my entire childhood. I also like other sports too, like football and basketball, and I would really like to make a career out of being able to work in sports analytics. And in particular, I really like Bayesian statistics, spatiotemporal statistics, and machine learning, and applying them and creating some cool visualizations and models within sports.
Very cool. And last up, we've got Eli.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elijah Kavan. I did a Bachelor of Mathematical Physics from the University of Waterloo, then I did a Master's in Mathematics at Wilfrid Laurier. Like Brendan and Ryker, I'm interning at Staffleets, so it's great. We kind of have a good team around here, and we collaborate a lot. And so my main interests are coming here with Bayesian statistics, and I'm really interested in that. And now I've kind of delved more into like measure theory and stochastic calculus. Those are the main areas of research I'm working on.
Yeah, very cool. So now let's get into, I guess, what everyone sort of wants to see and hear about. There was a big data ball competition. Obviously, FU has a history of doing very, very well. And you guys have just made the final. Congratulations. So who wants to run us through the notebook?
Yeah, so I will share our notebook with you. You can go through everything. All right, so our big data ball entry was titled Punt Returns Using the Math to Find the Path. So basically, we just wanted to find the optimal path for the punt returner. The Big Data Bowl's topic this year was special teams. So that incorporates field goals, extra points, punt returns, and what was the other one?
Kick returns.
Kick returns, yes, thank you. So we chose to focus on punt returns for ours. And what we do is we try to construct an algorithm to determine the punt returner's optimal path instantaneously as the play progresses, conditional on the position of all the players at that frame, and try to get a metric to evaluate their decision-making throughout the play and as it continues. And then with all that, we create a couple models to try to predict their expected yards remaining on the play at any frame, using a couple of metrics that we determined. And with that, we then rank the punt returners throughout the league. So the data that we were given was the 2018 to 2020 NFL seasons. There was tracking data, scouting data, and then game plays and player info that was available to us. So we focused heavily on the tracking data to try to utilize all of that. So our first part is creating the path. So what we're trying to do is get an optimal path that will look something like this. So from one frame to the next, our algorithm is going to try to look at where all the players are, where all the windows are in the play, and kind of connect the dots to get to the end point.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So this is calculated at every second?
So the frames are 10 frames per second.
10 frames per second. Very cool. Okay, so let's dig into sort of like the nitty gritty. So how does it start off? So to start off with, there's obviously a punt and someone is set up to receive it, yeah?
Yeah, so we can start at frame 1, and maybe Brendan, you can walk us through these first few steps of how we can calculate that.
Yeah, for sure. So we start right from the punt return. So right as the ball carrier gets the ball. And what we're going to do, so we're going to do this in 3 steps to actually calculate this optimal path. So the first thing we want to do is use what we call, or what's called the line edge triangulation, to kind of take all of the defenders on the field and create this plot here on the left, which kind of breaks up the field and shows all of the gaps between the defenders. And then also create some extra windows kind of on the sides there, as you can see, to connect this whole structure with the sidelines. And then we kind of get this network of windows that the carrier can move through on his way towards the end zone, or like all of the different paths that you can move through. And then with that, we kind of get this defensive structure here. Then next up, what we want to do is take that, and in the middle plot here, in step 2, we want to quantify the pressure along each of these windows to kind of show like how much pressure is the defense imposing on each spot along these windows, and which spots are more open than others. So for example, here, if you look closely, kind of right in the top left there, we have a window connecting number 79 with the sideline. And if you look right beside number 79, it's very, very hot there. There's a lot of red, indicating there's a lot of pressure that he's putting on that spot, and he can be there at a moment's notice. Whereas as you move towards the sideline, it gets more like yellow and green, and it becomes more open. So if the carrier were in that area, he would be able to move through that spot pretty easily.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So is this done with just sort of like average speed? So you could integrate in like how quick and how well 79 actually moves laterally at some point?
So yeah, right now we didn't actually take into account like player talent into the model. That is a good, like a next step that we did want to take. But in terms of actually calculating this, Robyn, if you can move below a little bit, we create a metric called penalized expected arrival time.
Yeah.
Where basically what we're doing here, if you look at this top or this left panel here, we're going to take some target location on the field is represented by the X here. And we're going to calculate the expected arrival time from each defender in red here to that target location while being penalized by the blockers in blue. Oh, sorry, just if you can go back up for a second there. Yeah, just while being penalized by the blockers in blue here. And then we're just going to repeat this over and over for all of the defenders on the field, and just take the defender with the minimum penalized expected arrival time as we calculate here. Then below here, we kind of have a bit more details about how we actually do that, where essentially for each defender, we're just going to take the distance from build a straight line from his location to the target location. Then we're going to project every blocker in the area onto that straight line and take the length of that projection as represented by D1 here for player number 95.
Yep.
Then from that, we take kind of the distance from the defender to this projection is represented by D2 here. That kind of gives us like 2 measures of the lateral distance from the defender and the straightforward distance from the defender to the blocker.
Right.
Yep. And then using these, we simply plug them into this equation here that we have in panel B, which is also visualized by this kind of diffusion style heat map here. And we call this a projected Gaussian kernel. And really what we're doing here is we're taking like a 1D Gaussian kernel where we set X to be equal to D1, or kind of like the lateral distance from the defender for each blocker. And then we're going to set the standard deviation to be equal to D2, or the forward distance from the defender to the blocker, as we showed before. Then we take the value of this kernel, or the minimum of the value of this kernel in 1 to kind of cap it at 1. So it can't really go up to infinity, like as you can imagine, as the standard deviation kind of shuts down and goes towards zero, it can kind of get really weighted up, right? Kind of when the X value is very close to zero. So we limit that there. Then we multiply it by some constant K, which is kind of like a tunable parameter in this case, which allows us to, like increase or decrease the blocker penalty as we view fit. And we ended up deciding on K equals 5 for this project just after some trial and error. But this is where, as you were mentioning before, this would be a good spot where we can maybe adjust K based on the defender and blocker strengths to allow us to incorporate that and better kind of calculate the blocker penalty here, because like obviously some of them would be much better than others. And that's kind of how we calculate this blocker penalty here, as I showed before. As I was talking about before. Then using that, we calculate the actual penalized expected arrival time in panel C by just tallying up the blocker penalties for each of these blockers. So in this case here, that's a total of 0.38 seconds. Then we calculate the expected arrival time from the defender to the target location, assuming he's running at a straight line speed of 7 yards per second, which gives us 2.81 seconds. And then we just add these two values up, giving us 3.19 seconds. And that's our kind of measure about how long we expect number 8 to take to get to that target location. And then using that, if you can just go back up a little bit there, we repeat this process over and over for all of the defenders on the field, and we can take the minimum time out of all of them. In this case here, we get 2.02 seconds for defender number 33. And that's sort of our measure of pressure at that target location X on the left there. And then we're going to repeat this over and over for like up to 20 evenly spaced points for each window. Then if you go back up to our 3 steps there, that's how we end up getting this heat map here and how we kind of quantify this pressure.
Right. Okay. So this is very mathsy, pretty cool. How did you come up with the idea to, I guess, approach the problem this way? So I guess there's a few parts. One, picking the problem, right? And then once you've picked the problem of punt returns, how did you come up with this idea?
So we kind of wrestle with a few things to determine, or do you mean just kind of with the windows or with the arrival time metric, or maybe a bit of both?
Bit of both. Yeah. How did you come up with that?
So for the windows, that was a good idea by Robyn when we were first kind of discussing what we were going to do, and talking about how we can maybe look at a punt returner and see where he can be better. We thought that having these open spaces here would be a good way to kind of quantify the seams, and I think Robyn could probably touch on that a bit more than I can.
For sure. So our original inspiration, our target project was really the convex hull related, which is one of our later things. So convex hull in general just makes kind of a shape around all of the exterior players involved. So we had that between the entire offensive and defensive teams. And then I said well, why can't we find our way through these hulls? And then it just kind of progressed to a larger project of finding how to get through an entire space. So we just kind of upped it at each step and kept adding more complexities until we ended up finding the way through the entire path to the end zone.
Yeah, very cool. So everyone's talked about having an interest in working in other sports previously. Have any of these ideas been used in those sports? Or did you just completely new?
The convex hull initially is used in a soccer paper by, what was it by? Do you remember again?
It was my Ryker and Eli's supervisor, Tim Schwartz. Then also the other person was Guan from SFU
Guan
as well.
And Schwartz did a paper on convex hulls used in soccer just to quantify the space of control throughout the entire field and how it progresses through the game. And kind of their idea was, is it's ideal for teams to park the bus? So in that sense, you get a tight little area in front of your goal to stop the other team from scoring. Is that beneficial? So we wanted to see if we could apply that to football.
Okay.
And then the rest just kind of grew.
Okay. So after looking at, punt returns, all this sort of stuff, let's go through a kick. So what happens and what should a punt returner do? So how can they use these visualizations to be better?
So a kick in general, I guess, going back to a punt return, would be a team on fourth down who is not in a good enough field position to kick a field goal, nor do they want to run another play. So it's a change of possession by a kick or a punt. So this punt returner is the one who is there to obviously return the punt, exactly how it sounds. So why we think this is useful in that sense is, and every extra yard you can gain better sets up your offense as they be closer to the end zone or closer to the target zone. So we think this is useful. Robyn, if I guess we want to scroll down to the bottom, we think this could be useful. So for looking at like professional sports in general, all these teams use video during the week. They all have, you watch a football game, all these guys have iPads on the sideline, and they can review their plays right after. So it was a way for us to, what we think is coaches and football staff can use this as a way to improve a punt returner in general. But then also, like we see in this table here, you can also review punt returners in general. So using the modeling plus the path deviation, we can front offices can look at possible free agents they want to sign specifically to punt return, even guys in their own team, and get a good idea of just basically how to improve in that aspect.
Yeah, so you can use this to evaluate their decision making. So how does that work?
Yeah. Go ahead, Brendan.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to kind of give like a bit of a technical background about how we actually evaluate their decision making. So if you go back up real quick, just to part 3, since we didn't really touch on that of our initial 3 steps there. So once we have this pressure along each of the windows, we can basically use what's called the A-star algorithm to find the optimal point along each window and to move through and try to find like the best path that kind of maximizes the distance gained while also kind of minimizing the amount of pressure that you're going to face. And then that's kind of how we get this optimal path here. And then to evaluate the decision making, we use what's called Frichet distance. So if you go back down again, we have this visual here about how it works. So basically, Frichet distance is kind of a measure of the similarity between 2 paths. In this example here, we have, say, the optimal path in black and the carrier's actual observed path in gray. And what we're going to do is basically, like what the Frichet distance does intuitively is it treats these 2 paths as like one being a man, the other being a dog. And we're trying to find the minimum distance of a leash to move from one end of the path to the other while always moving forward. And that's kind of how we measure the similarity between them. And we just look at the next 5 yards here, since during a punt return, really the field's kind of like ever changing, and what's going to happen 5 yards from now, or how the field's structured 5 yards from now, should probably be pretty different than how it's structured now. And also it kind of better quantifies the player's vision and decision-making skills in the moment. And yeah, that's kind of what we use here. And that's how we quantify the decision making. And we take kind of the median value of this Frichet distance over all of the frames that we have on the play to get a value of, or a measurement of their decision making skills and how much it follows our optimal path throughout the play.
If I could just add on to that, Robert, one of our previous colleagues at SFU were like Danny Chu, Matthew Ryers, and they were very successful in the Big Data Bowl. And the NFL kind of brought them back to do some of their Bezier curve clustering with a different position. So I think one other thing we're trying to do is see how our Frichet path distance or our optimal path, how we can translate that to other positions or other sports, right, as well, right? So a lot of the returners are wide receivers. So one kind of big idea that I had that I don't know if everyone shares is that maybe route running skill correlates to receivers that actually do follow the correct path or the optimal path when they're returning the punt.
Yeah, very cool. So I kind of like imagine when you receive the ball, right? There's automatically an instantaneous decision you have to make, right? And then, you're sort of watching these players go, maybe they hit some windows that they were supposed to hit, but maybe they get through some windows that they, seemingly didn't have a chance to get through. So were there any sort of interesting plays you can run us through? Maybe some really poor decisions by players at the start, or maybe a poor decision that turned out really well because they were just seemingly against all odds able to push through a narrow window, or maybe a window where they didn't have much protection?
Yeah, for sure.
And then, definitely show us the cool play where, what everyone wants to see, right? Points on the board.
Yeah. Let's go for this one. Seems like a good example. So this one is a 2020 play when the Chiefs, Kansas City Chiefs, played the Buffalo Bills, right? So this is Hardman. So McCall is kind of a player that we're targeting as one of the players that we can help improve with our optimal path metric. Looking at a lot of his plays, he tends to kind of aim for the sidelines a little bit. And we think that he could kind of get a little bit of a inspiration for what he kind of missed on a play. And then maybe in the future, he can try to get those extra yards using something like this kind of a pass. So this will just kind of like enlighten him to what he missed in a play and be able to look at it. So we can watch this as it goes frame by frame. The black optimal path is shown here, and then the light gray is the path that he actually took throughout the play. So it'll adapt at each new frame, the optimal path, to try to kind of redirect him in the best way, the most open space, depending on where his blockers are, depending on the arrival time that Brendan talked about, all that kind of stuff. So we'll watch this. Right, so once he kind of moves towards the sides, it gets a little tighter, but it re-evaluates.
So if I were to interpret this, his optimal path would have been to go to the other sideline to begin with?
Yeah, so I guess in his view, he should have gone right when he went left. In our sense, like, we picture it as like the punt returner is facing where the ball is coming from. He should be able to see everything that's in front of him. Right. So he should, in theory, have that decision available. He should be able to see, do I go forward? Do I go left? Do I go right?
Yeah. And this is a consistent pattern, particularly with Hardman. So you were saying like you want to use it to improve his returning skills.
Yeah. So that's one of the plays. Here's another one we can watch by Hardman against Miami.
Oh, get there. So
this one's actually one of his better plays. So he did actually get the touchdown. You can see at the start, he did really kind of angle towards the sideline. So it does often encourage players to go the sideline or optimal path. But Hardman just kind of always leans towards the sidelines and hopes that there is someone he can deke near there in order to get a play like this. One more option is against Tampa Bay. Where again, he just goes straight sideways when multiple times he has other options to kind of pick better situations. So in the end, he only gains 10 yards. But even at that initial instance, all these guys in red are his teammates. So clearly, if he kind of just went straight, he probably would have gotten a good 15, 20 yards out of this play.
Right. And instead, he did not go too well, did he?
No, yeah. So that's kind of what we can hope that a team might be able to use our stuff for.
Yeah. So how much do you think this is sort of like the returner making the decision versus maybe where the blockers are set up? So, I mean, it's kind of like two parts, right? So say for this one, you're saying that he should have followed his blockers in a bit more. Could it be maybe he doesn't have a lot of confidence in them? Then that's why he's always trying to, I guess, solo it straight to the sideline and up.
Maybe, yeah. So I think the trend that we've seen too is that these very high, Hardman's a very skilled player, had very good, at the combine, ran a really fast 40-yard dash, great agility, all these kind of stuffs when he was a draft eligible player coming up. All these things they basically drafted him for. So we believe that when we look at all these really skilled players, that they tend to try and get outside more instead of playing that like bully ball type, I'm going to run right up the gut, as you see these running backs do and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's more to do with these more skilled guys that try to get outside rather than not necessarily not trusting their blockers. You are taught. I grew up in a football family. My dad played. My brother played at a very high level, and he was always told is follow your blockers. Even if in this case, if he would have gone up the gut here, he probably would have gained more yards than running outside. But again, that leads to high risk injury, all these different factors that we don't necessarily take into account when we're looking at a model. But yeah, so the blockers are such an important part of a play. But yeah.
That's why I thank God for Ryker on the team, Robert. He's the only one of us out of all of us that actually plays sports at a competitive level.
Yeah, that's very cool. All right, so could you...
If I'm going to add on, Robert, I was just going to say that, the second part of the notebook was all about the modeling. And so they kind of, I think, complement each other, right? So the optimal path is all about the returner making the correct decision at every frame. And what the modeling does more of what you said, based on where the kicking team is or based on where the returning team is, what would you expect, an average returner, how many yards would you expect him to get? And then we can compare that with how many yards they actually got. So a guy like Hardman, who's so elusive and fast, he often gets more yards than he's expected. But our point and what we hope to show is that, well, if he then also made the correct decision, that he would get even farther and he'd be a really elite returner.
Yeah, very cool. Could you take, say, the model and because you already mentioned that you're looking at where the blockers are, where the defenders are. Could you just take a snapshot and just say, where should a team optimally set up for when they receive from a blocking point of view? Right. So say, that the kick's going down the middle, hypothetically, you can sort of sense it. Where should the optimal blockers be to sort of maximize these possible running windows for a player?
So I think, so one of the things, I think that's what our hull does. So the adaptive stochastic convex hull is a way for, to measure field control by each team. And I think that would explain, when the ball's caught or even during the return, have the blockers put themselves in good positions. Is the kicking team in general getting down and having really good downfield coverage? So if you see these large hulls by either team, they're doing a good job in defending the kick or on the contrary, returning the kick. So that was how we tried to attack that problem.
And the intuition would be that for the returning team, you want your hull kind of small and a small area. And for the kicking team, you want a very large area. So for the guys trying to tackle, you want a large coverage area so they can, just in case the returner skips out somewhere, you can still get to them. But for the kicking team, you want a small area protecting the returner. For the returning team, you want a small area protecting the returner.
Yeah, very cool. I think it was mentioned that a lot of players do try to run to the sideline and up. Would you say that's the dominant strategy that it seems, at least from the data that was used, that players are going straight to the sideline and looking to run up instead of using their blockers a bit more?
I think it really depended on the player, or even on the team or the situation. A lot of times, yes, a player thinks he can use his speed to get to the outside, but there were so many plays to look at, and you see all our optimal path wants them to gain yards first and foremost. So you see with these guys with the small path deviation that they're more typically probably going up the middle, trying to gain as much yards as possible right off the bat. I think Robyn can add to that as well.
Yeah, so we did kind of do one method that we didn't show here, and I don't readily have available, but we took some of the best players or best punt returners of the league and kind of looked at what pass they're actually taken and kind of like standardized them all to start at the same spot. And a lot of the best players kind of do tend to go down the middle, and they'll get the most yards expected, right? So the more sideways you go, right, the more like energy you're and time you're wasting for the other team to come and catch you. Whereas if you go down the middle, like players like Gunnar Olszewski, Jamal Agnew, they tend to go down the middle and they'll at least like get 15, 20 yards. Whereas a lot of the sideways people, you're lucky if you get 5, right? It's not very often that it's going to be open along the sidelines. So we did kind of see a trend emerge from that the center is maybe the best way in terms of getting somewhere fast.
I mean, it's just Pythagoras theorem too, right? Like if you're going on the longest side of a triangle, so it's smarter to optimize the maximum amount of yardages you want to get on the play. You should go up the middle and you should try to follow your blockers.
Yeah, that's very cool. And then I guess the very beginning phase of the play, could you assess punters who just put their teams or put the returner in just a really shocking position? So where, by the time they receive the ball, there's just not a lot of space for them at all to run through.
Yeah. So we have some plays where really, if you look at some of the Hardman plays too, the ones that we have pulled up might not really show this exactly, but there are some plays where like right off the bat, there's a defender pretty much right on the ball carrier. But if you look at, say, that other one that we just had up there, I think it's that one there. Yeah, if you go kind of like 4 or 5 seconds in where the Buffalo defender kind of has the guy covered. Right, so maybe like a little bit further. Yeah, actually you kind of avoided them there. But yeah, like basically at this point here, you might have a play where this is what it looks like, right, as he captures the ball about.
Yeah.
And then like the optimal path here, like we still always get an optimal path, and that's, I guess, his best route to do given the situation he has. But like it doesn't really take into account how likely he is overall to make any of these selections. It just takes the best selection of what he has. Right. So like there are some cases where you have an optimal path here, but there's really, no matter what he does, is not really going to get through. Like at this point here, he's basically being tackled. And then he kind of gets driven towards the sideline a little bit or forced kind of out to the side. So yeah, we kind of have some cases there where like right as he gets the ball, he doesn't really have much of a choice to make it down the field or get any significant yardage. But for the most part, we kind of have like we just have punts where he can at least get a few yards or he can make a better decision versus the one he did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Ryker has a bit to add there too, or can add a bit there.
Yeah, so I guess what we did with our model, since we're looking at an optimal path of a return, on a punt itself, there's a few things that can happen, right? The punter can kick the ball out of bounds, and then the team gets it right where it goes out of bounds. They can kick it through the end zone, and the team gets it at the 20-yard line. Or the punter, the returner, if he catches it, has 2 choices: to make a fair catch, where no one's allowed to hit him, and the ball is placed right where he caught the ball, and the play's over, or he can just choose to return it. So a ton of times where the punter puts the return in a bad spot, where a lot of hang time, or where he allows his defenders to get down field really fast, and there's no room for the returner to go, he'll call a fair catch. So at least with our returns, we were analyzing plays where the returner decided that he had enough time to make at least an initial play. And that's also explained through our rankings. So the return yards above expected. So since, we calculate these expected yards over every frame. So from the first frame, if you have, if your expected yards are super low, you're gonna, and you perform well above that, then you get these are what we consider our good returners, and then vice versa as well.
Yeah, very cool.
In a position like this, what Brendan was saying, like we would expect like our tackle probability model to give us like a really high probability of it being a tackle, and that would feed into our expected yards model, which would again would say that the expected yardage at this point would be very, very small.
Yeah, that's extremely cool. Okay, so let's go through, I guess, a bit more of the nitty gritty. So everyone knows that these kind of projects, they don't happen overnight. So how did everyone work together? How was that? And how much time did all this actually take?
Yeah, I guess I could start off with kind of like how we formed the team. So I believe all four of us really officially started our degrees here in September. I think Robyn might have did a few courses here before. But yeah, we kind of like we came here in the fall and we knew of Danny and Matthew and Lucas and James and how their team won a few years ago. And we decided we want to try to recreate that magic. So I reached out to a few of our supervisor students, so our supervisor, Dr. Tim Schwartz, and then Ryker and Eli were eager to join in. And we had a different team member at first, but he had to back out just due to some other commitments. So luckily we were able to bring in Robyn in. Yeah.
Sorry.
Very good decision.
I want the credit for this, that when the other team member had some other priorities, I kind of said, oh, hey, I met this PhD girl in my statistics class. I think she'd be good for this. And she was interested in curling or something, some sport like that. So I said, well, maybe she'd want to do something with football. And she really took it on and like maybe spent a whole semester of her PhD research, like working through this. And because of that, we're here, and because of all the hard work. And I would just say that, with a project like this, it really works out when you have a strong relationship with your teammates and you can kind of work over Discord and meet in person. And that made this really easy. So like me, I worked really closely with Ryker. Robyn and Brendan worked really closely together, and we were able to like kind of combine both our parts to make a really strong project, I think.
Yeah. And then in terms of like the timeline and stuff, we kind of we were pretty loaded with coursework here. Our program's a pretty course intensive program. So yeah, like throughout October and November, we kind of got a little bit done. Like we got the start and we kind of knew what we had to do, or like we had a rough outline of what we had to do for both of our parts. But it wasn't really until about like early to mid-December that we were really able to sit down and work on this once our courses were done. And yeah, we basically spent our Christmas together over Discord, just talking about this every day and grinding out the code. And luckily we were able to get things done by the deadline.
How much code's involved? And what tools did you use as well?
Yeah, we used R and Python. So our part was totally done in R, and really like tidyverse was a huge help for us. Being able to build out a whole pipeline that could run through this frame by frame sequentially, rather than having to build out like a big giant nested, like several layers of for loop. Right. Yeah. So that made things quite easy for our part in terms of building out the optimal path for Robyn and I. And in terms of how much code was done, I'm not sure of the exact number of lines, but
I was going to say, Robert, I think something that like even Brendan wouldn't even say is like how much kind of like, classical write on a piece of paper and then scribble it and throw it in the garbage goes on. So I'm sure there's tons of time that Brendan was experimenting and writing tons of code, or me and Ryker were writing tons of code and then just kind of threw it all out and started all over again. So yeah, a lot of coding definitely goes in that you don't even see in the final product.
Yeah. So yeah, to that point, like there's probably at some point I went through and I kind of trimmed it down and just got the essentials of what we needed, and I cut out probably like 3/4 of what we had or just through all of the trial and error and all the stuff we did. So yeah, there was a lot in there, but only about like 25% of it really made it into the final product for our part, at least. I know Ryker and Eli did a lot too with their modeling.
Yeah, it's definitely a function of the person too. I'm a little more of like an old school R, whereas Brendan's like new school R and can make everything that I would write in 100 lines, he can do it in 10. So it's definitely like about the person.
So you use more base R?
Yeah, I'm definitely a base R. I would ideally like to transition into more of the tidyverse world. But it's definitely how you're kind of raised through that language is a function of it too.
And you mentioned Python was used. So what part was that?
Yeah, so a lot of the modeling I did was in Python. So yeah, I was just say that I'm kind of the black sheep of the group. I kind of had a different undergrad and just I used a different tool, but we were able to kind of
nitty-gritty, how did you combine the languages? Was it just one than the other?
Like reticulate. There's a reticulate package in R that allows you to like code Python right in an R markdown.
Yeah, very cool. So doing this project, what surprised you? So like everyone's a football fan, right? Would have been watching like this year's games while doing this project. Is there something that you thought was maybe true? And then as you're digging through the project, you're looking at the data and you're like, oh, gee whiz, these are some poor decisions here.
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say you really see it in games. Like I guess when you're watching, like it's kind of a tough question to answer because like we obviously get to look at it from a top down view of dots and lots of pretty colors and stuff like that. We're on a field, you know, a lot of times it's you think something's good or you think a play might be done, and all of a sudden a guy squeaked out the other side and he's going for 50 yards. So I think it's hard to see for the average fan something like our project being put like just watching a game and trying to put the two together, which is why we think it would probably be a really useful tool for teams and even we also mentioned that it might be good, you know, for broadcasts to do something like this, show something like this as well.
So do you think broadcast should put like a top level camera maybe for really cool returns? So like you were saying, you can have the whole field view of where everyone is.
I think that would be a really cool concept. And I think they do have a lot of those new cameras and all the new technology where you can start to see it. But yeah, so replay wise, I think that'd be a really cool thing they could add. But for now, I think, like you said, with just watching the game live, it's tough to see.
Yeah. Cool. What was like everyone's a football fan, right? So when you get the data for the first time, who's the first player you want to pull out?
This year with special teams, it was a little bit more difficult. You know, like everyone's favorite player is usually, you know, typically a quarterback or an all-pro linebacker or, you know, someone in that nature. So when you dive down into special teams, a little bit more of an understudied part of the game, it's it's tough. Like my favorite team is the Dallas Cowboys, and so I watch them religiously, and it's thank you. And I'm an Oilers fan, so it's really rough. So yeah, you watch teams like that, and you see these rookies like CeeDee Lamb come up, and he's a really good receiver and all that kind of stuff. And then you start to dive into data like this, and it's like, okay, like he's their punt returner. How is his wide receiver skills translate into a punt returner? He was good in college. Is he good now?
Yeah, cool. All right. So I guess just to finish off with, how does everyone think that these metrics and stuff can be used, or what would you like to do next? How would you like to see it used next? And then I guess just individually, what's everyone's goals, plans coming up?
Yeah, so I guess our method, it's a nice view would be to kind of add in more player information. Similar to what Brendan said, like we assume the players are moving at 7 yards per second. We could actually incorporate their actual speeds, incorporate the angle that they're facing to make this a lot better. Other things, like we could use this, like the gunner is one of the players that tries to get to the punt returner. It'd be cool to see what his optimal path to the punt returner might be and how he would kind of go for or avoid like the vice who's trying to take him down, right? Something like that would be a lot very interesting again in the punt returner situation, or moving it to other plays. Like if there's a handoff in just a regular play, what's that guy's optimal path to get as many yards as they can? A nice thing also about our optimization system is that we can change the end target. So maybe your end goal isn't always to get to the end zone. You're just trying to get an extra 10 yards, maybe an extra 20 yards out of this current situation. We can change what the end target is and adapt it to maybe find the best way just to get those 10 yards.
Right.
Anything like that.
Yeah, then I could also add a little bit there too. One question that was posed to us when we brought this up with some of the former SFU alum here was that, like, do you take into account the risk of a fumble, right? So like if you go up the middle, you're more likely to fumble than if you were to take it off the sideline. And in this project here, we don't really account for that. And that's something that we can kind of add into and maybe build upon to incorporate that. And one way we could do that is in econometrics, like they use the A-star algorithm that we use to build out this optimal path a lot. And what they do is they have like the A-star algorithm has a cost function associated with it to kind of determine like what cost you want to put on like the movement you're going to take. And there's a lot of different ways you can like properly formulate one to get like a well-defined cost function. And then with that as well, they're also accompanied with a utility function. And this is a lot from my friend Tyrell Stokes, who works at Zealous Analytics, who is very, very smart and kind of is a bit beyond me. But like the way he was describing it is that this utility function is a way, like there's risk parameters within it. So it's kind of a way that you can incorporate risk in it and say like, maybe we really don't want to fumble here. So we're going to set the risk parameter to be really, really low. And you might not get a lot of yards, but then you're just going to run out to the sideline and you won't fumble. Versus maybe you're willing to take a bit of risk and you're going to try to go for a touchdown or try to go for a lot of yardage. And you might want to like up the risk parameter where it sets the optimal path to go up more up the middle. And I think that's a very cool idea and a cool way that we can kind of build upon this and make it into something that coaches can use in a different way to make decisions or tell the punt returner what to do.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and as for next steps, as we're named finalists, now we get to go and present our work to the NFL. Something that's a little different this year than previous years is what they did is they kind of focused us, the finals teams, in a certain direction. So now they're saying, using your project, pick one team, and how can you improve that team? What can your models, your metrics, your algorithms do to change something in this team for the better? So we went through a lot of the teams that had kind of a high path deviation and a low yards above expected. So who's not performing as well as we can? And we came to the conclusion that Mecole Hardman of the Kansas City Chiefs could help with some kind of revisualization of some of the plays that he's seen and hope that we can impress the NFL with this work. And, you know, even maybe the Kansas City Chiefs, we can help improve them a little bit and their strong punt returner, you know, make them a little bit better with our model.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, because the Chiefs really need to be more efficient on offense, right? That'll be great.
Yeah.
So what your show is that, like, you know, when Mecole catches a ball, the expected yards, our model would say, is like really large, but what he actually gets is not very much. And then when we look at the path, it'll just be like the videos we show, they just, you know, run to the sideline and gets tackled.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so what is everyone's up to next? So what is their like personal goals? So I think a few people are working with stathletes, for example, interest in curling. Like, do we want to try to get, you know, make sure Canada gets a lot of gold medals at the Winter Olympics? So what's everyone's goals? And then what's the best way for everyone to get in touch with you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, so I guess I can start. So goals coming up. Stathletes is a 4-month internship that runs for the semester. I would love, it's possible extension, so I would love to keep working with them. They're doing great work in hockey with a ton of on a ton of different angles that a lot of people haven't looked at in hockey yet. So especially being so passionate about that sport, it's been nice to do that. And I would love to continue on, but I would love to also be do something with a team. So I know I still have a year of school left, but starting to get my name out there for NHL, NFL teams would be a kind of a goal and a dream of mine. Especially getting a little taste of the internship, like I said, in the NHL already. Going back would be in a bigger role would be great. Since the big data bowls kind of happened, we've all of us have been a bit more active on social media, especially on Twitter. I feel like that's where a lot of these sports analytics people are. So other than email, Twitter, like my Twitter @ is rmorrow18. You can give me a follow or message me on there, and I would hopefully we'll be adding a lot more sports analytics content on my feed as well coming up.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd say mine is pretty much the same as Ryker. I'm also working at Stathletes. It would be cool to work with a team in the future, but also Stathletes is great as well, and I've had a great time there. And yeah, in the future, I'm going to start working on my thesis after the summer here. And hopefully I want to try to get out a few other research papers on some of the other projects that I've done and some of the projects that I'm doing now within sports. So that would be really cool. And yeah, you could reach me at Brendan Kumagai. So BrendanKumagai at Twitter or on Twitter. Or you can email me at, my first name, last name again at gmail.com. And you could also check out my website, Kumi Hockey, so KUMIHockey.com, just for all of my projects and all of the stuff I've done before in the past.
Yeah, so I guess my next steps is I'm trying to work to build a PhD thesis in statistics. I'd like to involve curling in some manner for that. Ideally, after the Olympics, it adds a little bit of fuel to my fire. About how we can improve certain situations. I used to curl at the same rink as Jennifer Jones, so it's some heartbreaking decisions where you can see that they're not making the right call. So a lot of what curling is done is kind of like end to end, similar to baseball, where it's inning to inning. A lot of the data is just very surface. I'd like to go more into the decision making in the game. Are they making kind of the right chess moves at the right times in order to get the end result that they want? So that's a little bit of what I want to do, because a lot of countries are putting in a lot of effort and money and funding for universities to improve their curling teams, Japan, South Korea, China. They're all getting really good.
Yeah.
Whereas Canada kind of assume that they're the best, and other countries are coming up on us really quick, right? So I think I need to give Canada a little bit of a shake, that we need to put in some work and we need to help our teams out. And then, you can reach me on Twitter at RR_sportsstats, or you can email me at rmr3@sfu.ca.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I would just say, you can call Robyn basically the Billy Bean of curling. She's coming here to change things. So yeah, for my future plans, I'm still working with Stathletes. I've gotten really interested in quantum computing, so leveraging that more. And in the next 20 years, I think that's going to be basically something that takes over machine learning. So those are my kind of future plans. You can usually reach me just by Googling Elijah Cavan, ELIJHCAVAN. And, I have LinkedIn, Twitter, email, and all that. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining me on the very first video recording of Chilling with Charlie. I reckon just quietly it'll take off. So thank you very much for taking the time. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
You don't just hang around cinemas watching Marvel movies waiting for some special clips at the end. Nowadays, you got to do that with the video shows, such as Chilling with Charlie. Today, we were lucky enough to show the presentation to Eric Eager of Pro Football Focus. And we got him to record a question, and we also recorded the responses to that question. So stay tuned for some interesting insights. Did that lead them to win the big data bowl? Who knows?
Yeah, so I thought it was a great presentation. My question, when I looked at a lot of the optimal paths for punt returners, sometimes it looked like the blocking wasn't necessarily relevant in a lot of cases. So there was the one where all the blocking was to the left and the optimal solution was to the right, where almost no Kansas City Chiefs players were. The question I have is that because blocking is so unreliable on special teams that, to follow it almost is suboptimal because it's not good anyway? It's this illusion of, a support, or is there something else in the algorithm that sort of makes that, the optimal path?
First off, I just want to say thanks, Eric, for the question. It made us think more deeply about our model and the kind of assumptions that we made. And we also just want to say that we're fans of your show, the PFF Forecast, the work that you and George do. With regards to your question, I think we have to ultimately disagree, although I think we think that you bring up some interesting points. Blocking in special teams is definitely different than other parts of the game. Players are moving at a higher speed because they're running maybe 20 yards to the returner, and they come from different defensive backgrounds, right? These are mostly linebackers and defensive backs, safeties, right? They're not linemen out there blocking. So the quality of players is lower than you would see starters on offense or defense. So these are certainly factors that we might take into account into our algorithm in future work. Specifically for our work, we do consider blocking to be a crucial part of special teams. We take this into account in a variety of ways. So the first would be our returner or kicking hull metric, which takes into account basically the quality of field position each team has, the kicking or returning team. Our hulls are stochastic in the sense that if a defender is blocked, they're removed from the hull. So it really gives you a sense of, is kind of the return team or the kicking team winning the battle of doing a better job either or blocking or getting closer to the returner. We also calculate blocker and defender leverages and use these features in our random forest model. So our blocker leverages penalize blockers if they aren't angled well relative to the defender, if they're farther away as well. And higher leverage blocks would be the area where our returners should look to take advantage of. Those should be the windows that they choose. And then our random forest model can use these features to estimate the number of yards a returner will gain by the end of their play, conditioned on the previous information that we've seen so far.
Yeah, exactly. So more specifically about our optimal path, the A-star search algorithm works by taking into account the cost of moving to a new point, and what we call the heuristic of how much closer that move brings you to your goal. The algorithm works by finding the best path to the target by keeping track of the cost and heuristic totals and finding a new path if this total becomes too large. This heuristic describes the remaining distance to travel to the target from a point, and here it takes into account the yards remaining to the end zone. For our cost function, we start by looking at all possible points along the nearby windows that the punt returner might travel through from his given position, and we look at the penalized expected arrival times of the kick team players to each option. The penalized expected arrival times adds a delay to the player if many blockers are along the kick team player's path to that returner. So we're using a weighted balance between how long the impeded tacklers will take to get to this point and how much closer that move will bring you to your target. So let's look at this initial frame here of Kansas City versus Buffalo, where our optimal path says the punt returner, Hardman, should move to his right, even though his whole team is to his left. If we look closely, there are really three options available to him. If Hardman went to his left, he would run into the combo of two Kansas City players and a Buffalo player. Overall, there's not much room unless he beats them to the outside along the sidelines. This also includes a large lateral initial movement and a small chance of getting past that area. So thus it would lead to most likely a really small gain. In the middle, he could pass between the same group of three players and the Buffalo player number 54, and then possibly dash to the sidelines. As 54 is not blocked at all, he has a very small penalized expected arrival time to any of the areas that are really around him. and would have a good chance of completing the block on Hardman. In our optimal path, we show that Hardman can use his speed to gain as many yards as possible, but he has no teammates nearby. He would most likely run out of bounds or get tackled near the 25 or 30-yard line. Overall, this is the best option out of the three that are available to him to gain as many yards on the play. As the play progresses, our optimal path is updated, and our initial path may not always be the best, as shown here.